I never thought my own family would throw me away like an old newspaper. But that's exactly what happened on that sunny Sunday afternoon. We had just returned from what I thought was a lovely family picnic at Green Valley Park. My arthritis was acting up a bit, but I hadn't complained, not even once. I'd spent the day watching my great-grandchildren play, helping my daughter Susan set up the food, and listening to my grandson Michael talk about his new promotion. It felt normal. Felt like family. When we arrived home, I noticed something odd. My bedroom door was closed. I always leave it open to let the light in. "Grandma Rebecca, we have a surprise for you," Abigail said, her voice unnaturally bright as she guided me toward my room. At 63, I might move a bit slower than I used to, but I'm not senile. Something about her tone made my stomach tighten. Abigail swung the door open with a flourish. Ta-da! My bedroom had been transformed. Not in a good way. My clothes were packed into 2 large suitcases sitting on my stripped bed. My dresser drawers hung open empty. The photographs that usually covered my walls were stacked in a cardboard box. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice suddenly thin. Abigail put her arm around my shoulders. "We've organized everything, Grandma. You're going to Sunny Pines Retirement Community. We've already paid the deposit." The room went silent. I could hear the clock ticking on my nightstand. The one gift my late husband James had given me before cancer took him 15 years ago. "Retirement community?" I managed to say. "You mean a nursing home?" "It's not like that, Mom," Susan chimed in from behind me. "It's a really nice place. They have activities, nurses on call, and you'll be with people your own age." My own age? As if that was all that mattered. "I don't need a nursing home," I said, pulling away from Abigail. "I'm perfectly capable of living in my own home." Michael stepped forward. "Grandma, we've been talking about this for months. You live in this big house all alone. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one is here to help?" Months. They'd been planning this for months without saying a word to me. "This is my home," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I'm not going anywhere." Abigail sighed dramatically. "Grandma, be reasonable. We've already made all the arrangements. You move in tomorrow morning. They're expecting you. Tomorrow. They wanted me gone tomorrow." I looked around at their faces, my daughter, my grandson, and my granddaughter Abigail. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They had packed my entire life into boxes without my permission. Did anyone think to ask what I wanted? My voice was steady now, despite the earthquake happening inside me. "Mom, you're getting older. This is what's best for you," Susan said, not meeting my eyes. "Best for me? Or best for you?" I asked. The silence that followed told me everything. I walked slowly to my dresser, opened the bottom drawer they had missed, and pulled out a folder. My hands were shaking, but not from age, from anger. "I want everyone in the living room. Now." They exchanged glances but followed me. Once we were all seated, I opened the folder and pulled out the mortgage statement for the house we were sitting in. "Do you know who pays the mortgage on this house, Susan? The house you and your children have been living in rent-free for the past 12 years. Susan blinked, confusion crossing her face. "What are you talking about? Dad paid off this house before he died." I slid the statement across the coffee table. "Your father and I refinanced to pay for your divorce settlement, remember? He died before it was paid off. I've been making the payments ever since. $1,850 every month. From my own savings." The color drained from Susan's face as she stared at the paper. "You mean, you own this house?" Michael asked slowly. "Not just the house," I said, pulling out more documents. "I pay the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, the major repairs. Remember the new roof last year? The furnace the year before?" Abigail stood up abruptly. But you're retired. How could you afford all that?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I worked double shifts as a nurse for 30 years, Abigail. I saved. I invested. I didn't spend money on luxury cruises or designer handbags like the ones you carry." The room fell painfully silent as my words sank in. "So," I continued, gathering the papers back into the folder, "if anyone will be making decisions about where I live, it will be me. And I've decided I'm staying right here in my house. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to unpack." As I walked back to my bedroom, I heard Susan begin to cry. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but a stronger part knew it was time they understood exactly who I was. Not just Grandma Rebecca who baked cookies and babysit children, but Rebecca Winters who had silently carried this family for years. Tomorrow would bring hard conversations. But tonight, for the first time in years, they would see me for who I truly was. Nobody slept well that night. I could hear them whispering downstairs until the early hours of the morning. When I finally came down for my morning coffee, the kitchen was unusually quiet. Susan sat at the table, her eyes red and swollen. Michael was nowhere to be seen, and Abigail stood by the sink, aggressively washing dishes that didn't need washing. "Mom," Susan began, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. We thought we were doing what was best for you." I poured my coffee, taking my time. "Did you? Or was it what was most convenient for you all?" Abigail slammed a plate into the drying rack. "That's not fair. We were worried about you being alone. What if you had an emergency?" "There's a difference between concern and control, Abigail," I said calmly. "If you were truly concerned, you would have talked to me first." I sat down across from Susan, cradling my mug between my hands, feeling the warmth seep into my arthritic joints. The kitchen had always been my sanctuary. After James died, I'd spent countless nights here, paying bills, balancing checkbooks, and figuring out how to keep us all afloat when Susan's husband walked out on her and the kids. "I think," I said carefully, "it's time I shared some things with you all." Susan looked up, uncertainty in her eyes. "What things, Mom?" "The things I've kept to myself for 15 years. After breakfast, I led them to the small room off the kitchen that had once been James' home office. Now it was mine. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer neatly labeled. I pulled out the files one by one, spreading them across the desk. "When your father died, Susan, he left me with $42,000 in life insurance. Not a fortune, but enough to live on while I figured things out." I opened the first file, medical bills from James' final months. Insurance had covered most, but not all. 2 months after the funeral, you came to me. Tom had left you with 3 kids under 12 and a mountain of debt. Susan shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." I cut her off gently but firmly. "You asked me to co-sign for an apartment, but the landlord wouldn't accept your application even with my signature because of Tom's credit history. So I offered to let you all move in here temporarily." I moved to another file, property tax records showing the gradual increase over the years. Temporary became permanent. I didn't mind. I loved having you all here. But when you couldn't find work because of the recession, I went back to nursing. Night shifts at the hospital while you slept. I was 50. Abigail's defensive posture had softened. "You went back to work? I thought you were retired." "I was. But someone needed to pay the bills." I pulled out pay stubs, bank statements, evidence of my silent sacrifice. "I worked until I was 60. Those last 2 years my feet were so swollen some nights I could barely walk. But I never complained." "Why didn't you tell us?" Susan whispered, her face pale. I looked at her, the daughter I'd raised alone after her father died young, leaving me a widow at 35. "Would it have made a difference if I had? Would you have made different choices?" No answer. I continued. "When Michael needed tuition money for community college, I cashed in one of my CDs. When Abigail's car broke down during her senior year, I used my vacation fund to buy her a used Honda." I pulled out another file. "This house needed a new water heater 3 years ago. New windows the year before that. The homeowner's insurance goes up every year." Their faces reflected growing comprehension. "Mom," Susan said, her voice small, "we had no idea." "That was by design," I replied. "I didn't want you to feel like a burden. I wanted to help without making you feel ashamed." I closed the files carefully. But that doesn't mean I ever stopped being a person with my own life and choices. Michael had come in during my explanation and now stood in the doorway, looking stunned. "Grandma, why would you do all this without saying anything?" I thought about his question. It was the heart of everything, wasn't it? "When James died, everyone treated me like I was helpless," I explained, remembering the pitying looks, the gentle suggestions that I couldn't manage alone. But I wasn't. I'd been managing our finances for years because your grandfather was hopeless with money. I knew exactly what I was doing. I looked at each of them in turn. "I chose silence because I wanted to preserve your dignity. Because helping family isn't about recognition or gratitude. It's about love. I closed the last file. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to be discarded when I'm no longer useful, or when my presence becomes inconvenient. Abigail, my beautiful, strong-willed granddaughter, had tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, she whispered. I thought you were just Grandma. Just Grandma, I repeated softly, as if that's a small thing to be. In the silence that followed, I felt decades of invisible work finally being seen. It was both painful and liberating, like lancing a wound that had festered too long beneath the surface. Susan reached across the desk and took my hand. Her fingers felt so much like mine. We shared the same knuckles, the same veins that rose beneath thin skin. What happens now? She asked. Outside, the spring sun cast long shadows across the backyard where her children had grown up, where I had planted tomatoes and roses, where James and I had once planned a future that looked nothing like the one I'd lived. Now, I said, my voice firm but not unkind, we renegotiate what family means to all of us. I let my revelation sink in for a day before calling a family meeting. Some wounds needed time to breathe before being dressed. By Thursday evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Susan had been tiptoeing around me like I was made of glass. Michael had brought me flowers, drugstore carnations that sat awkwardly in a vase on the kitchen counter. Abigail had been conspicuously absent. I set the dining room table properly, with the good plates we usually reserved for Thanksgiving. I wanted this conversation to have weight, formality. When they all finally gathered, their faces were a mixture of shame, apprehension, and in Abigail's case, a lingering defensiveness. I've made some decisions, I began, my voice steadier than my heart. And I want you all to listen before responding. I placed a folder in the center of the table, a different one from before. This contained the results of my visit to my attorney yesterday. This house will remain in my name until I decide otherwise. I've spoken with Mr. Hargrove about updating my will and establishing a trust. I looked directly at Susan. You and the children may continue to live here, but there will be changes. Susan nodded, her eyes downcast. First, I expect a contribution toward household expenses. $700 monthly to cover your share of utilities and maintenance. I don't need help with the mortgage. I've managed that for 15 years and will continue to do so. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Grandma, I can help more if. I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I turned to Abigail, who was examining her manicure with sudden interest. Abigail, you're 28 years old with a full-time job. It's time you found your own place. I'm giving you 60 days. Her head snapped up. What? You're kicking me out. I'm asking you to be an adult, I corrected. You make enough money to rent an apartment. You've been living here rent-free, saving nothing, spending everything on clothes and weekend trips. That's not fair, she protested. Michael still lives here too. Michael contributes $400 monthly toward groceries and helps with home maintenance. He's also saving for his own place. I looked at my grandson, who had the grace to look embarrassed, though he could be saving more aggressively. Susan finally spoke up. Mom, I understand why you're upset, but isn't this a bit extreme? We made a mistake, but we thought we were doing what was best for you. Did you? I asked quietly. Or did you see an opportunity to claim this house as your own once I was out of the way? Susan's face crumpled. How can you think that of me? I pulled out another document from the folder. This is a text conversation between you and Abigail from 2 months ago, discussing how you would finally have space to renovate once I moved to Sunny Pines. The blood drained from Susan's face. How did you? Abigail left her laptop open in the living room last weekend when she went for coffee. The messages synced. Silence fell over the table. Michael looked between his mother and sister, visibly uncomfortable. I don't want to believe you were waiting for me to die or be tucked away somewhere so you could take what I've worked for. I continued, my voice catching slightly. But your actions suggest otherwise. Abigail stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we committed some crime. We were worried about you being alone. Then why didn't you talk to me? I asked, looking her directly in the eye. Why make arrangements behind my back? Why pack my things without my knowledge or consent? She had no answer. The truth is, I said, addressing all of them. You stopped seeing me as a person with rights and feelings. I became an obligation, a problem to solve. And that ends today. Susan was quietly crying now. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. Grandma, what can we do to make this right? He asked. I took a deep breath. You can start by seeing me, really seeing me. Not as an elderly burden, but as Rebecca Winters, a woman who has lived a full life and intends to continue doing so on her own terms. I pushed another set of papers forward. I've outlined my expectations going forward. You can each take a copy. If these terms aren't acceptable, you're welcome to find other living arrangements. Abigail snatched a paper. So it's your way or the highway? After everything we've done for you. The room went silent. Even Abigail seemed to realize the absurdity of her statement. What exactly have you done for me, Abigail? I asked softly. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then threw the paper down and stormed out. The front door slammed moments later. Susan wiped her eyes. She'll calm down. She's never been told no before. That's part of the problem, I replied. And it stops now. I stood, gathering the remaining documents. I love you all, but I won't be invisible in my own home anymore. I won't be managed or disposed of like an inconvenient piece of furniture. As I headed toward the stairs, Michael called after me. Grandma? I'm sorry. We really messed up. I turned, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. I know, Michael. That's why you're still welcome here. But things will be different now. That night, lying in bed, I felt lighter than I had in years. Fear and anger still churned inside me, but something else had taken root alongside them. A fierce determination to reclaim the woman I'd allowed to disappear beneath layers of silent sacrifice. The woman James had fallen in love with. The woman who had raised a child alone, built a nursing career, weathered grief and hardship without breaking. That woman wasn't ready for a retirement home. She was ready to live again. The next 30 days passed in a strange dance of avoidance and cautious reconciliation. Susan paid her first contribution promptly, leaving the check on the kitchen counter with a handwritten note that simply said, I'm sorry. I love you. Michael redoubled his efforts around the house, fixing the leaky bathroom faucet and repainting the peeling trim on the back porch without being asked. Abigail was another story. She'd returned late the night of our confrontation, slamming doors and making her displeasure known. Since then, she'd adopted a policy of cold politeness that bordered on hostile. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, her expression unreadable, as if she were trying to figure out who this new person was who had replaced her compliant grandmother. I filled my days with purpose. I joined a memoir writing class at the community center, started walking daily in the park with my friend Eleanor, and even accepted a part-time position consulting for the nursing school where I'd once taught clinical rotations. Small acts of reclamation. On the morning marking 30 days since my ultimatum, I sat at the kitchen table sipping my tea, reviewing the terms I'd set out. Susan had met her financial obligations. Michael had been more respectful of my boundaries and input. Abigail had made no progress on finding her own place, as far as I could tell. The front door opened and closed, and moments later Abigail appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked tired, still wearing scrubs from her overnight shift at the hospital where she worked as a physician's assistant. Morning, she said curtly, making a beeline for the coffee maker. Good morning, I replied. Long night. She shrugged, keeping her back to me. 3 car accident victims. 2 will make it. Despite the tension between us, my heart ached for her. Healthcare was never easy. I'm sorry, Abby. That's hard. She turned, surprise flickering across her face at my use of her childhood nickname. For a moment, I glimpsed vulnerability before her walls came back up. I've been looking at apartments, she said abruptly, pouring coffee into her travel mug. Everything's overpriced or in terrible neighborhoods. I nodded. The rental market is challenging right now. I can't afford anything decent on my salary, she continued, a familiar defensiveness creeping into her tone. Not with my student loans. I sipped my tea, considering my response carefully. What's your budget? She named a figure that was indeed modest for our area. And that's stretching it. Have you considered roommates? Abigail rolled her eyes. At my age? I'm not in college anymore. Many professionals your age share housing, I observed. It's practical. She slammed her mug down, coffee sloshing over the rim. Is this what you wanted? To see me struggle? To make me grovel? The accusation stung, but I kept my voice level. No, Abigail. I wanted you to see me as a person, not a problem to be solved or an asset to be managed. Well, congratulations. Mission accomplished. You've turned everything upside down. Mom's stressed about money. Michael's walking on eggshells. And I'm going to end up in some roach-infested apartment with 3 strangers. I set down my tea. Sit down, please. I need to sleep. I've been up all night. Sit, I repeated more firmly this time. To my surprise, she did, slumping into the chair across from me. I never wanted to hurt any of you, I said quietly. But you hurt me, Abigail. Deeply. You made decisions about my life without consulting me. You treated me as if I had no agency, no voice. She stared at her coffee, silent. Do you understand how that felt? To discover my family had decided I was no longer capable of determining my own future. Abigail picked at a loose thread on her scrub top. We were worried about you. Were you? Or were you worried about the responsibility I might become? Her eyes flashed up to meet mine. That's not fair. None of this is fair, I agreed. It's not fair that I've had to reassert my right to exist in my own home. It's not fair that you're 30 days into your deadline and haven't made real progress on finding a place. Abigail stiffened. I just told you. I know, I interrupted. And I'm willing to offer a compromise. Suspicion crossed her face. What kind of compromise? The garage apartment. The one we used as storage after your grandfather converted it for his mother. Abigail blinked. What about it? It needs work, cleaning, painting, some minor repairs. But it has a separate entrance, a small kitchen, a bathroom. It could be a decent studio apartment. She frowned. You want me to live in great-grandma's old apartment? I want you to have your own space, pay a reasonable rent, and learn independence while still being connected to family. I paused. But there would be conditions. Of course there would, she muttered. First, you would help with the renovation. Second, you would pay $500 monthly in rent below market rate but enough to establish responsibility. Third, and most importantly, you would treat me with the respect due to another adult. Not just your grandmother, but a person with her own rights and dignity. Abigail was quiet for a long moment, weighing my offer against her limited options. Why would you do this? She finally asked. After everything? I reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but close. Because you're still my granddaughter, Abby. Because I believe you can be better than this. And because sometimes people need both consequences and compassion to grow. She didn't take my hand, but she didn't pull away either. Can I think about it? You have until the end of the week, I said, rising from the table. Your original 60-day deadline still stands if you decline. As I left the kitchen, I heard her call softly. Grandma. I turned. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. With the nursing home. I really thought. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. I know, I said gently. But intentions don't erase impact. Remember that in your work with patients, too. That evening, Susan found me in the garden, deadheading the early summer roses. She sat on the bench beside me, watching in silence for a while. Abigail told me about your offer, she said eventually. The garage apartment. I snipped another faded bloom. And it's generous, Mom. More than she deserves right now. I smiled slightly. It's not about deserving. It's about finding a path forward. Susan touched a velvet rose petal. Do you think we can ever go back to how things were? Before all this. I set down my shears and turned to face my daughter. No, I said truthfully. And we shouldn't want to. How things were wasn't healthy for any of us, especially me. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I'm beginning to understand that. The setting sun cast long shadows across the garden my husband had planted decades ago. The garden I had maintained through grief and joy, through seasons of plenty and seasons of loss. Nothing stayed the same. Growth required pruning, sometimes severe. But new blooms always followed, often stronger than before. We're not going back, I told Susan softly. We're going forward together, I hope, but with clearer boundaries and greater honesty. And if we can't, she whispered. Then we'll face that too, I answered, picking up my garden shears once more. But not today. 3 months passed more quickly than I expected. Autumn arrived with its crisp mornings and golden afternoons, painting the maple trees in our front yard brilliant shades of red and orange. The garage apartment was finished, freshly painted walls, new laminate flooring, and furniture we'd found at estate sales and second-hand shops. Abigail had moved in 6 weeks ago. After agreeing to my terms with surprising grace, change rippled through our household in other ways too. Susan had started dating again, a quiet history professor from the community college who brought her books and made her laugh. Michael had found a better-paying job and was looking at small houses in the neighborhood. And I had reclaimed not just my authority, but parts of myself that had been dormant for too long. On this particular Sunday, I was preparing a family dinner, something we'd started doing weekly as part of our healing process. As I chopped vegetables for a salad, I heard a tentative knock at the kitchen door that connected to the driveway. "It's open," I called. Abigail stepped in, holding a bottle of wine and a bouquet of mixed fall flowers. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore jeans and a sweater instead of her usual designer outfits. "I brought these," she said, setting both items on the counter. "The wines that Pinot Noir Mom likes, and I thought the flowers might look nice on the table." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "They're beautiful." Abigail hovered uncertainly, then reached for an apron hanging by the pantry. "Can I help?" I handed her a cutting board and some tomatoes. "These need quartering for the salad." We worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the rhythmic chopping of knives and the classical music playing softly from the radio in the corner. It reminded me of when she was younger, before designer handbags and nursing home schemes, when she would help me bake cookies on rainy afternoons. "Grandma," she said finally, her voice hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. With Sunny Pines and everything." I nodded but didn't interrupt. "I was wrong. We all were. But I think I was the worst." She set down her knife. "I was the one who found the place. I was the one who convinced Mom it was a good idea." I turned to face her fully. "Why? That's what I've never understood. Why were you so eager to send me away?" Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "I was scared." "Of what?" "Of ending up like you," she whispered, the words tumbling out. "Working yourself to the bone for everyone else. Never putting yourself first. I watched you give and give and give until there was almost nothing left. And then I watched everyone take advantage of it, including me." I leaned against the counter, absorbing her words. "So your solution was to put me in a home?" She shook her head miserably. "I thought you'd be taken care of there. That you could finally rest. That we'd visit and bring you flowers and you wouldn't have to worry about mortgages and broken furnaces anymore." She wiped at her eyes. "But that wasn't the whole truth." "What was?" "I was planning to move back into the main house with Mom. Take your bedroom because it's bigger than mine was. I told myself you wouldn't need it anymore." Shame colored her face. "It sounds awful saying it out loud." "It sounds human," I said quietly. "Flawed, selfish, but human." Abigail looked at me in surprise. "You're not angry?" "I was," I admitted. "Furious, hurt, betrayed. But anger is exhausting to maintain. And I've come to understand something important about you. About all of us." "What's that?" "We were all doing what we thought was necessary to survive. I sacrificed silently because I thought that's what a good mother and grandmother does. You pushed me aside because you thought that's what a practical adult does with aging relatives. We were all wrong in different ways." Abigail reached for a tissue from the box on the counter, wiping her eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Probably not," I agreed with a small smile. "But forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to move forward unburdened by resentment." She nodded slowly. "I like my apartment. I thought I'd hate it, but it feels good having my own space, my own bills. Even when it's hard making ends meet sometimes." "That's called growing up," I said, returning to my vegetables. "It happens at different times for different people." "I'm 28, she said with a self-deprecating laugh. "It's embarrassing it took me this long. Better late than never." We finished preparing the salad together, and Abigail arranged her flowers in a vase while I checked the roast in the oven. As she worked, she told me about a patient she'd helped save last week, speaking with genuine passion about her work for the first time I could remember. When Susan and Michael arrived with the history professor, whose name was Thomas, we sat down to dinner together. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. I looked around the table at these people who had hurt me, whom I had forgiven, who were trying in their imperfect ways to be better. "I have an announcement," I said as we finished the main course. They all turned to look at me, a flash of apprehension crossing their faces. "I'm going to Italy in the spring," I told them, smiling at their surprised expressions. "A 2-week tour with Eleanor and her sister. Rome, Florence, Venice. All the places your grandfather and I always talked about visiting but never did." "Mom, that's wonderful," Susan exclaimed. "That's awesome, Grandma," Michael added. Only Abigail looked uncertain. "Will you be okay traveling so far?" A month ago, I might have taken offense at the question. Now I recognize the genuine concern behind it. "I'll be fine. I'm only 63, not 93. And if I need help, I'll ask for it." She nodded, visibly relaxing. "Bring me back something pretty from Venice." "I will," I promised, lifting my wine glass. "To new adventures." They echoed the toast, and as our glasses clinked together, I felt something settle inside me. A peace I hadn't known in years. I had taught them the value of seeing me, truly seeing me. And in the process, I had finally learned to see myself. 1 year later, I stood in my bedroom, carefully placing the last of my summer clothes into the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Outside, the leaves were beginning to turn again, marking another cycle of seasons. So much had changed since that Sunday when my family had tried to pack me away like an unwanted heirloom. I picked up the framed photograph on my dresser. A new one, taken in Venice during my Italian trip. Eleanor and I stood on the Rialto Bridge, laughing as a street musician played behind us. That trip had been transformative, not because of the ancient architecture or the exquisite food, but because for 2 glorious weeks, I had been simply Rebecca. Not someone's mother, grandmother, or caretaker. Just a woman with dreams and desires of her own. A knock at my door pulled me from my memories. "Come in," I called. Susan peeked her head in. "The moving truck is here. Michael wants to know which furniture you're giving him." I smiled and followed her downstairs. Michael stood in the living room, clipboard in hand, looking both excited and overwhelmed. At 32, he was finally moving into his own home. A small craftsman-style bungalow just 10 minutes away. "I've marked everything with colored stickers," I told him. "Green means it's yours if you want it. I thought the guest room furniture and the small bookcase would be perfect for your new place." He hugged me impulsively. "Thanks, Grandma. This helps so much." The movers began carrying out the designated pieces while Susan and I supervised. Thomas appeared with a tray of sandwiches and lemonade for everyone, earning appreciative nods from the moving crew. "Where's Abigail?" I asked, accepting a glass. "I thought she was coming to help." "She texted that her shift ran late, but she'll be here soon," Susan replied. She lowered her voice. "She's also bringing someone. A pediatric surgeon she's been seeing." My eyebrows rose. "Serious?" "Seems like it. She's been different lately. More grounded." I nodded, having noticed the changes myself. Abigail had thrived in her independence, surprising us all. Her apartment was modest but well kept. She paid her rent on time. Most importantly, she had developed a new maturity in how she related to others, especially me. The front door opened and Abigail hurried in, still wearing scrubs under her jacket. Behind her came a tall man with kind eyes and prematurely salt and pepper hair. "Sorry we're late," she said breathlessly. "Emergency appendectomy ran longer than expected." She gestured to the man beside her. "Everyone, this is Dr. David Chun. David, this is my family, my mom Susan, her boyfriend Thomas, my brother Michael, and my grandmother Rebecca." David shook hands with everyone, his smile warm and genuine. "I've heard so much about all of you, especially you, Mrs. Winters. Abigail speaks very highly of you." I exchanged a knowing glance with Abigail, both of us silently acknowledging how far we'd come. "Please call me Rebecca. And I'm glad to meet you. We were beginning to think Abigail was making you up." Everyone laughed, and the afternoon continued with the controlled chaos of moving day. By evening, Michael's belongings were loaded, and we stood in the driveway saying our goodbyes. "It's not like I'm moving across the country," he said, hugging me tightly. "I'll still come for Sunday dinners." "You better," I replied, patting his cheek. "Your mother will hunt you down if you don't." As the moving truck pulled away with Michael following in his car, I felt a strange mixture of pride and nostalgia. Another transition, another letting go. Later that night, after Susan and Thomas had retired to their room, they'd moved in together 6 months ago, Abigail lingered in the kitchen, helping me with the last of the dishes. "David seems wonderful," I said, passing her a plate to dry. She smiled. "He is. We're taking things slow, but—" She trailed off, a blush tinting her cheeks. "But you can see a future there," I finished for her. She nodded. "It's different from my previous relationships. He respects me, challenges me." She set down the dish towel. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." I turned off the faucet. "What is it?" "David's been offered a position at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore." She twisted the towel in her hands. "He's asked me to consider going with him. There's a PA position open in the same department." I felt a momentary pang at the thought of her moving so far away, but I pushed it aside. "That sounds like an incredible opportunity. You're not upset?" She sounded surprised. "Why would I be upset about you pursuing your career and happiness?" Abigail leaned against the counter. "A year ago, I wouldn't have even considered it. I'd have been too worried about what everyone would think. Too afraid of change." She looked at me directly. "You taught me that, you know. When you stood up to all of us. When you showed me that it's never too late to choose yourself." I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "If this is what you want, then go for it. Baltimore isn't the moon. There are phones, planes, holidays. What about you? And Mom? We'll be fine. Your mother has Thomas now. I have my friends, my consulting work, my travel plans." I smiled. "Eleanor and I are thinking about a river cruise through Germany next spring." Abigail hugged me suddenly, fiercely. "I'm so sorry for what we tried to do to you. For what I tried to do." "I know," I said softly, holding her close. "It's behind us now." And it was. The betrayal had been real, the hurt deep, but healing had come in unexpected ways. My family had seen me as a burden, a problem to solve, and in doing so they'd given me the unexpected gift of reclaiming my power, my voice, my autonomy. The next morning I sat on the back porch with my coffee, watching the sun rise over the garden. The house was quieter now, with Michael gone and Abigail living in the garage apartment. Soon she might be leaving too, spreading her wings across state lines. Susan and Thomas were talking about downsizing, perhaps finding a place of their own in the next year or two. Changes, all of them, but good ones. Healthy ones. My phone chimed with a text from Eleanor, confirming our lunch date. Next to it was a notification from my bank, showing that Susan's monthly contribution had been deposited on schedule. A reminder on my calendar alerted me to a Zoom call with my financial advisor to discuss my retirement investments. I smiled, taking a sip of my coffee. This was what freedom felt like. Not the absence of connections or responsibilities, but the presence of choice. The ability to say yes or no based on my own needs and desires. The right to be seen, heard, and respected, not despite my age but because of the wisdom it had brought me. A year ago, my Nita had packed my bags without asking, believing she knew what was best for me. She had been wrong, but in her wrongness, she had inadvertently given me the push I needed to step fully into myself again. I wasn't just Grandma Rebecca anymore. I was Rebecca Winters, nurse, mother, grandmother, traveler, friend, consultant, gardener. A woman of 64 with more life ahead of her than behind. And I couldn't wait to see what came next.